Patrick. Welcome to the show, man.
Hey, Justin. Thank you for having me on.
Yes, abstract. We invested from Vitalize. There's a lot to talk about with that. There's a lot to talk about with every aspect of this company. But for people who don't know, what is abstract, Patrick?
So actually, I have no idea what we're doing either. No, I'm just kidding. So abstract is essentially a way to more easily understand what's going on in government with respect to bills. So as I would say most people recall, there's, I'm just a bill, from your childhood, uh, primary education, and mostly after that, people forget how a bill actually turns into a law. But in reality, this is how government operates. And so abstract streamlines and makes it easier to understand how does a bill actually turn to law? What are all the votes and revisions made to all these bills, these documents? And then how can you influence that more effectively and collaborate around those documents more effectively? So in a way, if you're familiar with Bloomberg Terminal, it's like Bloomberg Terminal, but instead for finance, you use it for legislation.
Okay, there's a lot to dive into with this. Let's go back to the beginning because most people are like, okay, there's this problem. Like, I'm assuming there's this massive problem within this. You found that, but take me through just why are you working on this company and how this gets started in the first place, Patrick?
Definitely. So we initially started this with the intent of making government more transparent, which is not an easy task. I studied electrical engineering, computer science. Have nothing to do with the political space. Same with my two co-founders. But my family came from Argentina. They immigrated here. My dad came here with the intention of being a politician. So a lot of politics and government kind of runs in the family and the blood. So
Nice.
come senior year, I was thinking, how can I merge my passion in politics and government with uh, everything I've learned in engineering? And that's where the idea came to make abstracts using AI. So the original idea was to take natural language processing and make summaries of legislation and make it more accessible for people to understand. So that was the genesis story. And yes, we did start as a senior project out of college.
A long way it's come since then. With that, in the beginning days, obviously you're looking at starting this company. You mentioned the we behind it a little bit there. How did you decide that this was okay, something you want to work on with that person? So you mentioned it's a project for school, but did you know right away, like, okay, I want to work with my co-founder on this? Like, I know for sure he's the one to work on this for. Like, just say anything more of that because I think we're always curious about how do co-founders meet each other? Like, how do they decide? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, so I have two co-founders.
Mhm.
Matt, I've known since I was 5 years old, which is a little too long in my opinion. So childhood friends and always kept in touch. Mo, I met at college. He was a classmate of mine, and he was the one other guy that actually cared about school like I did. Believe it or not, like we would actually do our homework and actually study for these electrical engineering tests. So we bonded over the fact that we were both just very motivated around our studies. So what happened was uh, one day I had a conversation with a resident of mine because I was a RA, believe it or not, and I was talking with one of my residents, and he said, "Hey, have you heard of the Green New Deal?" I'm like, "What's the Green New Deal?" He's like, "Oh, it's this bill that Congresswoman AOC introduced, and she wants to ban all sorts of airplanes." And I'm like, "What? You mean like after this, there's gonna be a law that's gonna ban airplanes?" He's like, "Yeah, she wants to ban every single airplane." It's like, okay. So I read the bill, I searched it up, read the entire thing. It was a painful process, and there's no mention of airplanes at all inside of that bill, at least how he was claiming. So obviously there was this misinformation, right, present. So I took that and I said, okay, obviously these bills are impacting us, they're impacting companies, they're impacting everyone. Why is this the first time I read a bill? And so I ran over to the electrical engineering lab where Mo was studying, and I said, "Hey, I think I found a problem that I really want to fix, and this may help society as a whole. You want to tackle this?" And then we called Matt at that time because he was our best friend. He said, "Hey, you want to try to build a prototype for this?" And that's how it started.
Okay, with that, in terms of building this product, then take me through a little bit more of that process of that because this seems overwhelming in some ways. Other ways, like, okay, well, how do we find all this? Like, just take me through more of that product development process, what you've ended up launching with at Abstract, because I'm super curious about that in the early days, especially.
Definitely. So we actually started with just very low fidelity design wireframes.
Yep.
Initially, we were using InVision. This was a little bit before Figma was more mainstream. So then we switched to Figma afterwards.
Of course.
So yeah, of course, everyone did. That would be a great podcast, like the impact of Figma on
True.
startups and
I'll reach out
the
to
world.
Dylan at Figma and get him on the show.
Oh, that'd be awesome. And so we start off with these low res wireframes. And the thing is, initially we wanted to make Facebook for bills, so we wanted to make a consumer app because that's what every college student thinks about. And so that flopped on its face. And through all the conversations we had, we got in touch with a Chamber of Commerce. And for those that don't know, Chambers of Commerce are nonprofit associations that advocate on behalf of businesses. And so we found out that these chambers had to track bills and legislation, and that it was a very difficult process to keep track of all these documents. And so we looked at that problem and said, hey, we could build a solution to that. So we made a low fidelity prototype, and then we said, you know what, let's make an actual product. And so we built it ourselves. We didn't have much front end experience, so we found somebody, an alumni actually through LinkedIn, to help us build the front end for free. Again, this is all around the mission of increasing government transparency. And with that low fidelity prototype, we got about 20 users on there, and that's how we were able to raise our first round of funding. So I always tell people, like, you don't need money to build something, at least a lot of money to build something initially.
Yeah.
You can always find people that are passionate about the mission, and we'll help you get there if you communicate right.
All right, two things that you said that I have to go back to. I can't just gloss over. One, the alumni that you just said how to build for free, because like, okay, someone hears that, they're like, how do I build this product? They're always trying to get, like, let's start with that first. And then I want to get to the 20 customers you had on there. But let's start with the alumni. How did you get him to help, or him or her to help you?
Yeah. So we knew that we weren't going to get funding out of college, right? And so we knew we couldn't just pay somebody a salary. So, yeah. And we also didn't have the money to actually incorporate and set up a corporate structure. So we didn't have formal equity either. So we leaned into the mission, right? We leaned into, hey, this is what we're doing. If we can get to X place with X traction, we can raise money and build an actual company. And so that's the mission we pitched to all these alumni. And this guy came out of the forest and said, hey, I'm down to work part-time as a hobby and build the front end for you guys. And the rest was history.
Wait, you say you pitched a bunch of them. So you just, like, on LinkedIn, you're like, okay, message, let's just send this to as many people as we can. Let's see who responds. Just say anything more of that. I love the tactical details, man, of all this stuff.
Oh, yeah. So you go on LinkedIn, use all the filters like alumni, computer science. Don't reach out. I mean, if they're back end, like, we need a front engineer. So we looked at those people and say, hey, we just graduated. This is our mission. This is what we're building. We're looking for help building this prototype. Would you be open to connecting? And our advisor was one of the top computer science professors. So that also gave us some validity at the time. That's how we got the first company.
The outreach is always so hard. Like, I know a lot of people obviously reach out to us at Vitalize for funding. So as you see good versus bad outreach, and also partnerships. If you're at a venture firm, everyone wants to partner for some reason because you know all these companies and they want to work with the portfolio. So people like you, for instance, they're like, hey, we have these services, you should work with us. And there is a huge separation between someone who has a very clear personalized message with why it's value add, why it makes sense for you specifically, and like why Vitalize, for instance, specifically, versus some like generic and like don't even use your name, whatever. So obviously going to alumni was huge because you have that connection already, some validation in there as well with advisor. So I like how you kind of show that as well. And then those 28 customers you got, take me through that and like how you reached out to them. Like, was that just like one by one sales? Like how'd you get these customers?
Cold emailing and cold calling.
Oh,
quite literally.
I love it.
Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce, that first connection was through our advisor, also LMU. And so the president of the chamber is an alum of LMU. And so again, it's like, everyone's got some network. Everyone's got something that they can leverage. And so I knew like the network I wanted to leverage naturally was the school. And so once we got them on board, then I took their name and then I cold emailed essentially, I think it was like 150 chambers early on, did all the cold calling. And it was actually a little bit easier because we weren't selling anything. At that point, the pitch was, hey, we're students. This is a research project. We know
Mm.
that there's policy, that we know that you care about legislation and advocacy. We're trying to build something to make that easier. Can we just talk with you for like 15 minutes? So it was a pretty easy pitch. Now it's harder because, funny enough, it's harder to reach out to them because we're selling a product now. So
Oh, when you have that student card, Patrick, it's perfect, right? It's so nice. I feel like more students have to use it. They don't realize the power they have, or even for like a limited amount of time, whether it be undergrad or like grad school. I did the same thing for a podcast back in the day. It was just like using this. Oh, I'm in school right now at USC. Like, just talk to me. Like, I don't have you on the show. It's so much easier than anything else.
yeah, like if students reach out to me, like I will make time. I'll make time for
Way
them.
different. Yeah, it's way
Yeah,
different than
yeah.
someone else. So you leverage that to get these customers. When you're thinking about that and the product you had at the time, how are you thinking about which customers you wanted, which ones would be like the first ones to test this out versus like, okay, ultimately want to get to these people? Just anything more of that, and how you're kind of thinking about the customer base you wanted.
Yeah, I mean, looking back at it, I feel like this is where we could have been a lot more pragmatic and structured. It was very messy. It was just like, oh, chambers need to track bills and legislation.
Sure.
Uh, and then we realized, oh, every corporation cares about legislation as it impacts their bottom line. Let's talk to Facebook. Let's talk to Google. And then, oh, there's lobbyists that are contracted out, like just like lawyers. Oh, there's lawyers. So there's just thing is, this market is so massive.
Yeah.
Despite what people think about lobbying, it's actually one of the largest markets because any organization that's anything needs to lobby. So we did get very distracted because we also tried going after every state, which was not smart. So we ended up focusing in on California, and then now we're going down to the local level. So if I were to do it again, which is what we did later on, I would have built out an ideal customer profile table from the start. So
Yeah.
for any of those that are in the earlier stages or even later stages, ICP table, super key. Lay out who's your actual customer, who's the person using it, who's the economic buyer, what are the pain points, how does your product solve those pain points, what's their flow, etc. So I would have done that if I could go back in time. I would have done that from the start.
I mean, there's obviously so much to learn, right? When you're a founder, there's like 1,000 different things you're trying to do all at once. So you're just like, let's just make progress day by day and see what we can do, which is always hard. With that too, so okay, they have that side of it. You got some initial customers and everything, but you mentioned this. You wanted to have this product and get things built before you could raise funding. Take me through raising funding, how that process went for you. I'm super curious.
Yeah. So we applied to 60 accelerators and pre-seed funds while we were in school. We got rejected by all of them, and two of them were just for reference. They were Mucker and Amplify, right? So
Mhm.
we got rejected by all of them. So then we said, okay, well, obviously this is not working out, but what can we do, right? What do we need to do before we get funding? And this is what most college, I mean, most even post college people don't understand. It's like the point of funding is to get to a goal, right? To have
Yep.
X amount of runway, X amount of cash to hire X amount of people, build X product in X amount of time, right? So all those X's, all those numbers we didn't have. So then we realized, okay, well, for this initial fundraise, we should be aiming for about a year. We wanted to have 12 months of runway, and we wanted to prove out that we could not necessarily generate revenue from right off the bat, but have a stickiness of the product, right? We're looking at monthly active use. And so in order to get that investment, we realized, well, we should build a very low quality prototype and actually have people use it. And so we went back to the drawing board and built out that low quality product. So between May and October, we built out a very shitty product, but it was something. And we got about 20, 25 people using it and vouching for us. And throughout that process, we refined our understanding of the market, pitched again to all those 60 people, and both Amplify and Mucker gave us offers. And they had previously rejected us. So that's how that process went.
That's amazing. With that too, so these monthly active users, why was that your kind of North Star metric? Take me through how you thought about that in terms of you needed that to be the thing that you're going to look at in this process, because you've probably maybe seen Lenny's newsletter. He has like a North Star metrics thing. I think he created there, and people are always looking at different metrics, and different industries have some gold standards, but every company is a little bit different depending on what they are. Just take me through how you thought about that with metrics and what you were going to care about at Abstract.
The indicator that lags the most, there you go, is revenue, right? So
Yeah.
in the end, ideally, and it's also the gold standard. It's like people are paying for a product, that's a very good sign, right? And using
Yeah.
it, right? So we weren't, as first time founders, I would say we weren't as comfortable asking for money for our pilot, right? I think second time around, we're actually doing this now with our current pilots where people have to pay for it. So
Yep.
we were saying, okay, these pilots are free. So in that case, what's the second best indicator? Well, some type of usage metric, right? The way we honed in on ours was just observing what our users do. So I think for anyone that's trying to figure out what metrics make the most sense, you have to understand the workflow of your user and then understand where are the pain points or the drop off points, and see, okay, our product should be solving those pain points. So if it is solving those pain points, what does that translate over in terms of metrics? So for us at that time, it was just discovering and reading the bills and taking notes. And they were doing that about once a week, twice a week. And so actually our metric was weekly active use, high level. And then there's more specific metrics, our input metrics to that North Star.
With these, you mentioned these different like trials, or like periods you give. What does that even look like in terms of someone coming in, like a company coming in using this, and like what are you looking for in terms of these pilots that you're running now, and like what does that look like for them? For them, anyone listening potentially, what does it look like though for them? What are you looking for? Obviously, you're looking at this metric as you mentioned already, but what does that look like in terms of the pilot itself?
Yeah. So the pilot, yeah, you just have to be very clear and honest with what you can deliver and what is it that you're trying to achieve with that customer. So back then, we didn't have a very well-defined engineering process, so it was very hard for us to say, hey, we're going to have X built out by X time. I mean, we were building everything ourselves.
Of
So
course.
back then, it was more of like, hey, you want to join this pilot that's semi-indefinite? But let's define some milestones of what you need and let's build that. And that was our product roadmap. Today, we have our built out product that is, there's no pilot there. It's just you subscribe, we have a set pricing structure, etc. For our local product, we're doing special pilots with people with the ability to track legislation in cities and counties. And the way that works is we have a set number of features, and we are very open to expanding that with our early pilot users. So the way it works, we just tell them, hey, this is what we have. What else would make your workflow? What else would solve the challenges you have with local legislation? And if it makes sense, we add that as a milestone with time estimates. So that's the difference. We're a lot more, I guess, measured with our timing and what we can build now.
And with that as well, the product, you mentioned that you obviously pricing now and like it's a little bit different at this point in time. Take me through that then today. What does it look like today in terms of that product, how you came up to that pricing, that business model even, because business model a lot of times is innovated in different ways, and can you find some unlocks if you figure out the right business model? Just take me through what that looks like for Abstract then today.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people say this. Pricing's a dark art. It's because it's like it's a mixture
Yeah.
of so many factors. We, for the state product, priced ourselves very similarly to the legacy software that's present at the state level. But we're realizing as we add features, we can actually price higher. So we are tweaking pricing with later stage customers. Earlier customers got better pricing. I mean,
Of course.
it makes sense. They took more of a
Yeah.
risk. But with new customers, we are updating pricing accordingly. So look at our competitors, but also just look at the time spent and also their budget. So we are developing tiers. Government agency with $500 million budget is going to be in a different tier than a nonprofit, right? That has
Yeah.
a couple $100,000s of budget. So tiering, competition, and then actual value. Was the value that our product adds to that customer? Those are the things we look at.
With that, so you mentioned competition. Like when you started this, and even today, what are these organizations, these companies? What were they using before they find Abstract? They're like, okay, Abstract's amazing. This helps us so much. Like, what are they using prior to that? 'Cause I'm just kind of getting an idea of the market for people who are curious about like, okay, they started this company, but like, did they already have other options before? Like, what is out there in terms of why they're using, like, why are they using abstract?
So at the local level, like cities and counties, you're using government websites and government
Ugh.
websites and spreadsheets. State level, you're using government websites or spreadsheets or the legacy software called Capital Track, um, which is actually just as it was last updated in 2001. Anyways,
Oh
um,
dear.
now if you have a lot of money, if you have a lot of budget, and you need to track multiple states and the federal, then you have Bloomberg government, you have Fiscal Note, you have Quorum, you have Politico. Politico has Politico Pro. You have government. Like, there's just so much going on there because they're all going after these larger multi-state corporation contracts, etc. So it's funny because like they're all focused there, but the states and locals, it's all underserved. So obviously, we want to saturate everything, but we're just taking a different approach, making it more accessible.
Making more take me through more of the differences though in terms of like abstract's product versus those. I don't have to go through every single one of them. I'm just curious, like someone comes through, it's like, all right, well, abstract clearly is there's a reason why you're doing this and reason why you found this hole in the market. Take me through like what that looks like in terms of why then people are using abstract more specifically.
Definitely. So one is data, right? So with California, it's such a complicated process and there's very unique things to our legislature. For example, there's this, for lack of a better word, let's just say a very screwed up process called gut and amend. And a bill can be talking about abortion and then it's amended and voted on. And suddenly it's talking about gun rights, but it maintains the title around abortion. So it's gutted and amended. This is how a lot of language is snuck in with bills, okay? That's something specific to California. We can detect when that happens using our classifier, our AI, right? So that's something that we're the only ones that can do that, and that's an example where all these others fall short because we decide to focus our data insights on California, and then beyond that, there's the collaborative piece. So in terms of accessibility, making it really easy to collaborate internally. That's why we take a lot of inspiration from Asana, from Notion, these other platforms, and make it easier to collaborate with your team. And if you need to share something with a client or externally, you can do that. So collaboration is really key. And then the last point is obviously pricing, being more accessible with pricing. A lot of the competition only prices up at the top for these big corporations. Hell, we're providing abstract for practically free for certain nonprofits, right? Depending on their budget. So really making sure everyone has access to this tool is key.
With everything you've done, so it's been a couple of years now, and you've raised funding, as we mentioned, a few $1 million. Building out your own team, first time founder, you start with your co-founders, great. Like, let's build this thing. Can we get some feedback, get some customers? But then you have to expand and you're never going to stay at like 3 people forever, obviously. Take me through how you've approached that, looked at building our team from funding and thinking about those first few hires after that and how that's gone for you, because it's something that every founder is kind of thinking about.
Yeah, that's a heavy question. So never hire because it's like, oh, I just want to hire somebody. Like you hire because there's a need, and early stage, you can't you can't take a risk on like a growth marketing person. At least usually you can't take that sort of risk with your early hires. So most SaaS companies like ourselves have to hire in engineering and product because that's what's most important at this stage. So we hire where we see there being a need. And then something that one of our advisors told me is like, never hire to delegate, hire to elevate. So whoever you hire, you shouldn't just be delegating tasks to. They should be elevating the company. They should be autonomous, right? Thinking of things on their own. If not, you're just spraying yourself out more and more thin. So those are a couple of things that we've kept in mind as we've been hiring.
In that too, Patrick. So with that, looking at this overall market, like the competition is always fierce for talent, for tech talent, especially. Any engineering talent is insane. Like you look at obviously the big company options. If they want to go to big company, there's many startups hiring, different perks people offering. How have you looked at hiring in terms of winning over talent to join you at Abstract?
Yeah. So we cannot compete with the Googles or the Facebooks of the world, right? So we leaned in with our mission, right? So government transparency, I think, is something that resonates with a lot of people. And if somebody doesn't really care about that, I don't want them to work for our company. So that was a really core focus of our hiring process, was looking to see if in the first interview, if the first screening call, if they even brought up our mission or even brought up any sort of passion around government. If they didn't, we just moved on to the next person, because we didn't want to hire just another engineer that was looking to work for a startup and get equity and try to be a millionaire, right? That's not the
Yeah.
person we want. So really over indexing on mission and passion was really important. And the people really aligned with our mission were okay taking a pay cut because they understood that there was something greater than just money involved with this type of work. And we know they're going to stick long enough to actually take benefit of the benefits that come with equity as we grow.
Yeah, there's so many different companies that have done that same exact thing. Like you have to find out your unique kind of angle, right, with what your mission or vision of the company in some capacity. Because, like you said, you can't like outpay them in terms of big companies. You're always trying to find some other thing. A company I always bring up is Career Karma. It's come to mind, like helping people get into coding, essentially technical jobs. So like they have coding boot camps and everything, and their mission is just like they want to have like 1 billion people get jobs, which is kind of insane. So you think about that mission and like how same type of thing. It's like, okay, people want to join it for that reason. Abstract, obviously this mission is core to everything you're doing, and so people who vibe with that, like they want to join what you guys are doing, right?
And I was gonna say, with the people who want to go work for Google because they want that stability, there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's
Absolutely.
great,
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
And at the same time, there's nothing wrong with people that want to work somewhere because of the mission, more so the mission over the compensation. Obviously, you need your bare needs met, but that's something, that's a clear distinction that we always like to draw with any of the hires we make.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And okay, with abstract moving forward here, it's been a couple of years, like I mentioned. What is next? What are you doing next? What's kind of on the horizon for like near term for you guys?
Yeah, so I would say on the product side, things that I can talk about.
Yeah.
For one is a mobile app. So no one's really built a proper mobile app in this space. You're probably wondering, why does that matter? Well, the reason
Mm.
is, think about what lobbyists do. So lobbyists are called lobbyists because they would sit in the lobby waiting for the politicians to walk out and then talk to the politicians. Most of this work is on the go, and they've never really had a digital tool that was meant for their phones. And so we're really excited to be the first to provide that here in California and at the local level. And then on top of that, I would say local legislation, I'm very bullish on. I think there's a lot of innovation to be made in that space. There's so many cities, counties, agencies, school districts. Nobody knows what's going on. So beyond just making a very useful product that will generate revenue, I'm excited at what are the insights we're going to uncover. What's the corruption, for lack of a better word, that we'll uncover across localities, and what are some of the cool things that people are working on and trends, right? So I would say as we aggregate more and more data, the insights we'll be getting from all the data we have on legislation and voting and campaigns is going to be really interesting, but also useful for a lot of other applications.
Okay, you mentioned the mobile app, and that seems like when you say it, like it seems like a no-brainer. Obviously, you need to have a mobile app. To your exact point, was that something you knew from the beginning of early on? Like, okay, eventually when we do this out, we're gonna need a mobile app. This makes sense. Is it something you got out on the way? Like, just where does that come in the process of abstract?
Yeah, I mean, initially, no. It takes a lot of effort to build a mobile app. So
For sure.
for most founders, yeah, most founders, I always recommend stick with a desktop app when you start out. If you're in B2B SaaS, usually work is done on the desktop. So that's the mentality we had. But as we saw the actual, as we learned more and more about the workflow of our core customer, and we saw how mobile they were, we realized there was no other option but to make a mobile app.
With that too, when you think about making a mobile app, because any early stage startup, I mean, any startup really, but any, especially early stage, you don't have unlimited resources. Like this funding doesn't go forever. You have like always like all these things you could spend money on. You have talent you're hiring, you have like what acquisition if you have that, whatever. But you've always things you could spend money on. And to then start an app, obviously you're banking on the fact that an app is needed and this will also help eventually generate revenue, et cetera, et cetera. How do you think about like the impact of the app, what you need that to do for you, like adoption, anything around that? Because I hear that, I'm like, it makes sense, but also you have limited resources. So I'm just curious on how you think about it.
Totally. So that's something we've been thinking about a lot regarding resources and is it worth it to even develop an app? We're kind of in a middle point. We decided to take a web application and just make it scaled down for mobile views.
Yeah.
So really just being able to use Abstract on your mobile browser. And then we're wrapping that, for those who are more technical, it's a React app, we're using that and then we can wrap that in a, there's many words for this, but essentially it's an app. You can turn into an iOS app that's just a browser. If that makes any sense. So we're kind of cheating for this first version, but it's not really cheating. I mean, it's still a mobile app, right? I think as we grow, then we'll be able to actually build out a dedicated Swift focused application for iOS. Kotlin, Java based for Android, allow you to save notes without having to be connected to any sort of network, all these other cool features. But for now, for version 1, we decided to be still very lean, but still very useful. So I would recommend that for any startup that's thinking of doing a mobile app is like, hey, see if you can scale down your front end application to mobile views and then just wrap that up in an iOS app browser.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I think it's an important thing to know of like, let's just take step 1 in this for founders who are like, oh, should we build this whole thing out? Like how is the development resources, et cetera, like probably not needed. And I look at even just my own like user behavior of different apps. Like we have a angel investing community, obviously called Vitalize Angels. And like we're using Circle on the back end to create that, but they have a Circle app, which then we can have our community on the app. But it's pretty basic. I don't know what theirs is built on, but anyway, it's a pretty basic version. It's not like we had to build out our own app, but it's a little different thing. But it obviously is beneficial to have that in some capacity. And for yours, it makes perfect sense as well. And as we wrap things up here, so you mentioned some of the next things a little bit more. Just take me through more of that mission and like if you are successful with Abstract, what happens? Like what happens in terms of government? What happens in terms of the big picture? Like let's just talk about that for a sec before we wrap things up.
I love this question. Okay. I really think we're embarking on a golden age for government. Sounds crazy, but if you look at the history, since we started back in the 1700s, when the United States started, it was just a couple people making up bills, okay, and laws. So if you were like in Virginia and you're like, hey, I really don't think people should be throwing their poop out the the window here, right? Or like, hey, it smells kind of bad here. Let me go get on my horse and then go over maybe a town or two, talk to my politician. Let's write something up and then we'll talk. It was very simple, okay? As our population increased and then we had the technological revolution going on after World War II, things got a lot more complex, but there wasn't a lot of innovation done to make sense of that complexity. So now we have a lot more laws and bills, but we don't have ways of distilling what they actually mean or imply. So I think in the next 10 to 20 years, not only with bills and legislation, but across the board, defense, campaigns, etc., technology is going to, startups specifically are going to transform how government operates with its own self and with citizens. So I think long-term vision with Abstract, we want to be the gateway for understanding legislation. So our vision is to make an educated society where all this data is made accessible to all and people know what it implies. So being able to say, hey, I care about environmental issues. Let me pull up Abstract, see what's going on at the local, state, federal level. These are the politicians that represent me. This is how I should vote. Oh, let me build a quick coalition to get some votes up because this is what I really care about. Being actually involved and educated on what's going on with your government. That's our vision for the future. And not only the United States, but across other countries as well. So that is our end goal, be that gateway for understanding all that messy data.
I love it. I love your passion. Where can people go to learn more about Abstract and also connect with you, Patrick, if they'd like to?
Yeah, so our website's very simple. It's abstract.us. And then if you want to connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter. I'm a little bit more active on LinkedIn, trying to do a better job on Twitter. It's just Patrick Utz, UTZ. And yeah, happy to connect on any of those platforms.
Perfect. Patrick, thank you so much for the time today, man. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Justin.